Welcome back to Yossr English Podcast, where we break down the real barriers between you and fluent English. I'm your host, and today we're tackling something that literally every English learner struggles with at some point, yet very few people talk about it openly: the translation trap. You know that frustrating moment? Someone asks you a question in English, and you feel your brain doing somersaults. You're frantically translating from your native language into English, searching for the perfect words, and by the time you figured it out, the conversation has already moved on. Sound familiar? Well, you're not alone. In fact, this is the number one obstacle holding back thousands of intermediate English learners from reaching fluency. But here's the good news, and I mean this genuinely. This problem is completely fixable. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to retrain your brain so that English becomes your natural thinking language, not just something you're struggling to translate into. This isn't theory. These are battle-tested techniques that have helped learners at every level finally break through that translation barrier. So stick around, because by the end of this episode, you're going to have a concrete action plan you can start implementing today. Part 1. The translation problem. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're in a cafe and someone sits down next to you and says, "How was your morning?" Here's what happens in the brain of a typical English learner who hasn't yet learned to think in English. First, your brain hears the English words. Good start, right? But then, and this is the critical part, your brain doesn't immediately process the meaning. Instead, it translates. How becomes como or gomant or gif, depending on your native language. Your entire brain is working in overdrive, converting English to your native language just to understand the question. Then you formulate your response in your native language. Mi mañana fue buena, tuve un café, or whatever your native equivalent is. And only then does your brain attempt to translate this entire thought back into English. My morning was good. I had a coffee. Do you see how many steps that is? Your brain is basically playing ping pong, bouncing between languages 3 different times just to have a simple conversation. That's exhausting, and it's slow. And here's the worst part. By the time you finish translating, your brain is so tired that you've lost the natural flow of conversation. But it gets worse. Sometimes translations don't even work directly. Languages don't map onto each other perfectly. For example, in Spanish, you don't say, "I'm cold," you say, "Tengo frío," which literally means "I have cold." If you translate that directly into English, you sound strange. Native English speakers will understand what you mean, but they'll notice immediately that you're not a native speaker. This is why so many advanced learners still sound unnatural, despite years of study. They're not actually thinking in English, they're translating. Now here's what's truly interesting. Native speakers don't do this at all. When I ask you a question in English, I don't translate it into some universal language first. I process it directly. My brain goes straight from the sound waves to the meaning without any intermediate step. And when I respond, I'm not translating either. I'm pulling words directly from my English language thoughts. The big realization here is this: fluency isn't about knowing more vocabulary or memorizing more grammar rules. Fluency is about thinking directly in English. And the great news, this is a skill you can develop just like any other skill. Part 2. Why this matters more than you think. Let me be direct with you. If you don't learn to think in English, you will plateau. You might reach a decent level, maybe B1 or B2 on the European scale, but you'll hit a ceiling that's incredibly hard to break through. Think about it logically. If you're always translating, your speaking speed is capped at the speed of translation. Even under the best circumstances, translation takes time. Native speakers speak at about 150 words per minute, but a learner who's translating, they're probably managing 60 or 70 words per minute because they're doing double the cognitive work. But here's where it gets really interesting. When you start thinking in English, something magical happens to your confidence. And confidence is everything in language learning. Right now, you might be hesitant to speak because you're afraid of making mistakes. You're running through every sentence in your head before you say it, checking the grammar, making sure it's perfect. But here's the problem. Native speakers don't speak that way. Native speakers make mistakes all the time. They mispronounce words, they use incorrect grammar, they backtrack and start sentences over, but they do it fluidly, without shame, because they're so focused on communicating their message that the minor imperfections don't matter. When you train yourself to think in English, you start to develop that same confidence. You realize that communication is more important than perfection. And paradoxically, the moment you stop obsessing over perfection is the moment you actually start sounding more natural. There's also something else that happens. When you think in English, your listening comprehension skyrockets. This is because your brain is no longer split between processing English and translating it. You're working in one language in one channel. So when someone speaks to you in English, you're not trying to translate it, you're directly understanding it. Let me give you a concrete example. Have you ever watched a movie in English and suddenly the actor said something really fast and you had no idea what they said, so you turned on subtitles and then you realized it was just the word refrigerator? You know that word, right? Of course you do. But because your brain was expecting slower speech or because you were in translation mode, you missed it. The moment you start thinking in English, these gaps start disappearing because you're not passively waiting for English to get translated into your native language. You're actively engaging with English as it happens. And here's one more thing that's often overlooked. Thinking in English actually helps your pronunciation. When you form a thought in English in your mind, you're hearing it. You're hearing the stress patterns, the intonation, the rhythm. And over time, your brain begins to associate English words with the way they actually sound in English, not the way they sound in your native language. Part 3. The mistakes that keep you stuck. Now, I want to talk about something that might sound a bit harsh, but it's necessary. There are specific mistakes that English learners make that actively prevent them from thinking in English. And if you're making these mistakes, you need to stop immediately. Mistake number 1, waiting to feel ready. So many learners are waiting for the right time to start thinking in English. They're telling themselves, once I know 5,000 words, I'll start thinking in English. Once I feel more confident, I'll start thinking in English. Here's the truth. That time will never come. You don't learn to think in English by knowing more words. You learn to think in English by thinking in English. It's circular, yes, but that's how it works. You have to start doing it before you feel ready. Mistake number 2, trying to think in perfect sentences. This is subtle, but it's deadly for your progress. You might think that thinking in English means forming grammatically perfect sentences in your head, but that's not how native speakers think at all. Native speakers think in fragments. They think in associations. They think in images and feelings and rough ideas. The grammar comes later when they're actually forming the words to speak. If you're trying to construct perfect English sentences in your head, you're going to get stuck on every sentence because no one thinks in perfect sentences. You'll exhaust yourself and you'll give up. Mistake number 3, only thinking in English when you're studying. This is a big one. Many learners try to think in English only when they're actively studying, in their English class, or when they're doing exercises at home. But the moment they step outside that context, they slip back into their native language. This doesn't work. Language isn't something that turns on and off. You can't think in English for 1 hour in class and then think in your native language for the rest of the day and expect real progress. Mistake number 4, relying on English to native language dictionaries. Every time you look up a word in a translation dictionary, you're reinforcing the translation pathway in your brain. You're telling your brain, the way to understand English is to convert it into my native language. Instead, when you encounter a word you don't know, you should look it up in an English to English dictionary. Yes, this is harder at first. Yes, you might not understand the definition, but this is how you train your brain to think in English. All right, let's get to the practical part. Here are the techniques that actually work. Technique 1, the narration method. Start narrating your life in English. I mean, literally everything. When you wake up, say to yourself, not out loud if you're not comfortable, but at least in your head, I am waking up. It's a beautiful morning. I feel fresh. When you're brushing your teeth, I'm brushing my teeth. The toothpaste tastes minty. My teeth feel clean. When you're making breakfast, I'm pouring cereal into a bowl. I'm adding milk. The milk is cold. This sounds silly, I know, but here's what's happening. You're creating a situation where thinking in English is the normal, automatic response. You're not waiting for a conversation partner or a test. You're not trying to be perfect. You're just letting your brain get used to producing English descriptions of reality. Start with just 5 minutes a day. That's it, just 5 minutes where you're constantly narrating what you're doing in English. Technique 2, the substitution method. For the first month of doing Technique 1, you're going to start at a basic level. But as you get more comfortable, you need to increase the complexity. This is where the substitution method comes in. Instead of just describing what you see, start asking yourself questions and answering them. Why am I eating breakfast? Because I'm hungry. What will I do after breakfast? I will go to work. This is moving from passive narration to active thinking. You're now generating your own thoughts rather than just describing your surroundings. Technique 3, the delay method. Here's a technique specifically for when you're in conversations. The moment someone speaks to you in English, resist the urge to immediately translate it into your native language. Instead, pause for just a fraction of a second and try to understand it directly in English. This is hard at first, and you might fail most of the time, but the goal isn't to succeed, it's to create awareness. You're training your brain to at least attempt understanding without translation. As you practice this, something interesting happens. Your brain starts to realize that translation isn't necessary. It starts to find shortcuts. It starts to process English directly. Technique 4, the English-only search. From now on, whenever you look something up, use an English-to-English dictionary or even Google image search with English descriptions. Never translate. If you don't understand the definition of a word in an English dictionary, that's okay. Your job isn't to understand the definition. Your job is to start thinking about that word in the context of English, not in the context of your native language. Technique 5, the inner monologue. This is the most powerful technique, and honestly, it's the one that will change everything for you. You're going to start developing an English inner voice. Right now, your inner monologue is probably in your native language. As you read this, for example, you might be translating it in your head in your own language. But what if you didn't? What if, instead, you let yourself think in English directly? Start with simple observations. This is interesting. I'm learning something new. Then build up to more complex thoughts. I wonder how long this will take me to implement. I think I can start this week. The key here is that you're not performing for anyone. This is pure internal thought. Your only audience is yourself, so there's no pressure to be perfect. You can think in broken English, in fragments, in whatever way comes naturally. Technique 6, the immersion bubble. Create an environment where English is the primary language. This doesn't necessarily mean moving to an English-speaking country. It means surrounding yourself with English content. Listen to podcasts in English during your commute. Change your phone's language setting to English. Watch TV shows in English with English subtitles, not your native language subtitles. The goal here is saturation. You want to marinate your brain in English so thoroughly that thinking in English becomes the path of least resistance. Part 5. Your 30-day action plan. Let me give you a specific action plan that you can start today. Week 1. Start with just 5 minutes of narration every day. Pick a time that's easy for you. Maybe your commute, maybe when you're making coffee. Just narrate what you're doing in simple English. Also, download an English-to-English dictionary app and bookmark it. Week 2. Increase your narration time to 10 minutes. Add the substitution method. Start asking yourself questions and answering them. Also, switch your phone's language to English. Week 3. You're now doing 15 minutes of narration and substitution. Start intentionally avoiding translation when you encounter new words. Write down 3 words a day and look them up in your English-to-English dictionary. Week 4. You're doing 20 minutes of combined narration and questioning. You should also be noticing shifts. You might find that English is coming more naturally. At this point, introduce the inner monologue technique. Start thinking simple English thoughts throughout your day. Conclusion. Here's what I want you to remember. Learning to think in English is not a talent. It's not something that some people are born with and others aren't. It's a skill. And like any skill, playing an instrument, cooking, drawing, it gets better with consistent practice. The people who are fluent in English didn't get there by knowing more vocabulary than you. They got there by thinking in English until it became automatic. Start small. 5 minutes a day is enough to begin. The brain is incredibly plastic. It adapts and forms new pathways when you consistently challenge it. Within weeks, you'll notice a difference. Within months, thinking in English will be as natural as thinking in your native language. Your job now is to stop translating and start thinking. The techniques I've shared with you today work, but only if you actually use them. So I challenge you, pick one technique and commit to it for the next week. Just 1 week. See what happens. Because here's what I know for certain. The version of you that thinks in English is fluent. That person exists. The only question is how long it takes you to become that person. Thank you for joining me today on Yossr English Podcast. I'll see you in the next episode.